Hello, everyone. Welcome to Legal Discussion on Internet Law Review. Today's legal discussion is on the retirement of Associate Justice Anthony Kennedy, who announced his retirement earlier this week after 31 years on the U.S. Supreme Court. This, of course, has gotten a lot of attention, and I wanted to offer some additional value on how I think this replacement will actually impact the leanings of the court and their activities going forward. So, to answer that question, it's helpful to know where his ideological boundaries are and to see how they relate to other people. So here is one such analysis that has been done that shows the relative alignment of the Supreme Court justices since 1935. And we're interested in this period here, starting with Roberts, which is this black line here starting in 2005 and carrying over to today. That's the current Chief Justice, and that's the time period we're interested in. And we're interested in how these people have been in alignment while they've been serving on the court together. And so this rates them from relatively conservative to relatively liberal. So the most conservative justice, at least on this rating, is Justice Thomas at 3.5, and the most liberal are Sotomayor and Ginsburg, who are essentially tied at -2.5. So you can see that there's a pretty large ideological swing between the members of the court, although not as wide as there has been at some points in the past. You can see here in the past there was Justice Douglas, who was way more liberal than any other justice has been, and you can see that the conservatives peaked out when Rehnquist first came to the court before he became Chief Justice and became more moderate, which will lead me a little bit later to how I think this is going to impact things going forward. But what we can see here is that we have four justices who are in the conservative group. These are people who are above the zero line, which is here. So you can see the zero line here, just below Roberts, and they're all above that. And then, of course, we've got the four members below that, starting at -1. And Kennedy here is sort of in the middle. Started out more conservative and towards the end became a little bit more left-leaning. The data shows that on his Supreme Court term, he has sided with the conservatives about 2 out of every 3 times, so about 66% of the time. But he has, of course, sided with the liberals in some of the more notable cases, particularly in the rights area of the gay rights and reproductive freedom rights. He somewhat famously declined to overrule Roe versus Wade in a case called Casey versus Planned Parenthood, and so he has sided with the liberals on some pretty notable issues in the areas of reproductive freedom and on homosexual rights for marriage and otherwise. And so he has sided with the liberals on those issues, but with the conservatives more generally. And his leaving is going to shift things pretty dramatically. We can reasonably anticipate that the person that President Trump will appoint will be someone who will be more conservative than Roberts and will be somewhere in this Scalia, Alito, Gorsuch sort of range over here. Not as conservative as Thomas. It's pretty hard to be as conservative as Thomas. Rehnquist kind of pulled it off in his early term, but we haven't seen anything like that for quite a long time. Thomas is very conservative, so we could expect someone sort of in this trifecta area, Scalia, where Scalia used to be before he passed away, and Alito and Gorsuch are currently at. So whoever Trump appoints next is going to sort of live in that range. Now, what's really interesting about this from my point of view is that makes Roberts the new swing justice. You can see he's pretty close to neutral, pretty close to the line, and he has been coming down over his term. So we could reasonably expect that he is going to become even more moderate over time, and we can see that from the experience of his predecessor, Chief Justice Rehnquist, who started out extremely conservative when he was an associate justice, but when he became a Chief Justice, he became more and more and more moderate, and we should expect that trend to continue. One of the reasons we would expect the trend to continue is because as Chief Justice Roberts has institutional concerns for the reputation of the court. He doesn't want it to become perceived as a political body, and to the extent that's already happened, he's interested in mitigating against that happening any further. So he is going to probably moderate himself to hold back the conservative wing from some of the more conservative decisions. Don't get me wrong, I think especially in the short term, he's still going to be reliably conservative, especially more so than Kennedy, who was notably below him at all relevant times. But I think that he is going to become a more moderate justice and hold back the greater excesses. He might even try to get concessions from some of the more liberal justices in order to get their signing off on some decisions, so it won't always be 5-4. There has been speculation, including from most notably perhaps Jeffrey Toobin of CNN, who has said that he thinks that within 18 months abortion will be illegal. I'm somewhat dubious of this, both because Roberts is somewhat more moderate than the conservatives, because it would hurt the institutional authority of the court, and because of this line that he put in a dissenting opinion that he wrote in a racing case called Wayfarer, which dealt with sales tax. So it has nothing to really whatsoever to do with abortion, but he put in a very interesting line that I think is relevant. And so this is Chief Justice Roberts writing. He says, "This is neither the first nor second, but third time this court has been asked whether a state may obligate sellers with no physical presence within its boundaries to collect sales tax to residents. Whatever salience the adage has, third time's the charm has on daily life, is a poor guide to decision making." Now, what's really interesting about that line is while Wayfarer itself was the third in a series of cases that ultimately caused the overruling of two prior decisions, Justice Roberts is saying that third time's the charm is a generally poor concept. Now, why would he put that line in here? I think he put that line in here as a signal about abortion specifically, because what other major issue has two notable Supreme Court decisions? Well, that would be the issue of abortion. The first case was Roe versus Wade, which everyone has heard of. And the second case, which is notable, but no one seems to have really heard much about, is a case called Casey versus Planned Parenthood, which challenged Roe versus Wade, modified Roe versus Wade, but did not overrule Roe versus Wade. So if there were going to be a third time that the court would consider abortion itself, well, that would be some hypothetical third case, and it would be the third time the court, in this case, would be asking whether or not abortion is legal or not. So this line, third time's a charm, is a poor guide to decision making, I think is a signal from Chief Justice Roberts that he is not going to overturn Roe versus Wade. He may make decisions that will chip away at it, but I think he's unlikely to overrule it outright. So for people who have been speculating on Twitter that this is the end of abortion, I think that is not well observed based on the leanings of Chief Justice, where he's more moderate than the rest, and also based on this line, which seems to be a pretty strong indication that he is going to not overturn abortion. Without any doubt, however, Anthony Kennedy leaving the U.S. Supreme Court is a big deal for the court. He has for 31 years been a moderate voice on the U.S. Supreme Court. Before him, Sandra Day O'Connor was the most notable moderate voice, and he overtook that position. There's not really going to be any longer a moderate voice except for that of Chief Justice Roberts. Whether Roberts himself becomes more moderate, we'll have to see. My speculation based on this graph that we showed earlier is that he will become more moderate, and that his desire for the institutional concerns and being kept out of politics will ultimately cause Roberts to hold back the conservatives on some of the more major decisions, although we can expect a more reliably conservative court going forward. So there's a brief analysis of how Anthony Kennedy is retiring will change the U.S. Supreme Court and change doctrine. I think those people who are completely panicking are doing so with a little bit of overzealousness. I think that it is an important deal, but when you look at the graph and you look at these kind of lines, I think it's going to be a little bit more moderated than some of the more apocalyptic predictions have been. For right now, my friends, that is all. Hope this has been helpful. Till later. Cheers. Bye.